We're going to be creating today an eyeball, and we're going to be using clay. I don't have any Play-Doh, but we are creating a clay eyeball. So I want to go through the materials that you're going to need to have. Everyone's going to need a golf ball or a ping pong ball, but we're going to use golf balls. And a piece of plastic wrap. It should be big enough to cover the golf ball, but also you'll be using little small pieces of the plastic wrap that you'll be cutting off, which means that you will also need a pair of scissors. Okay. A knife is useful as you mold the clay. You're going to be needing a toothpick. Each person or each eyeball will have a toothpick. And then the different clays. You need a lot of white clay. That's our Solera. We're going to be using that to form the eyeball. Some colored clays like blue for maybe the iris. We'll use some yellow clay, some red clay, some green clay, and some black clay. Okay, you use mostly the white and the green and the blue. The rest you just need small amounts for. So let's talk about how we're going to do this. And after a couple of tries, I think we've sort of figured out how to best form it. And I'm going to start by taking my piece of white clay. And although my knife is not clean, it would be great to use a clean knife. I'm going to cut it in half. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to flatten it out. Okay, so you're going to create a flat disc. You can use a surface to do it, or just flatten it out to essentially a round ball. You can always trim it later. Okay, it doesn't have to be too big, but I would suggest it's about 2.5 to 3 inches in diameter. Although I may be a little bit off on that, but about this big. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do that for both sides of the eye. Okay, so we're going to flatten both discs. So if you want to just fast forward through this, I'm going to flatten both discs. Okay, one of these will be the front of my eye, and the other one will be the back of my eye. So I'm basically going to have an eyeball, right, that's going to come together. So let's go ahead and do that. So I have 2 flat discs right now. So I'm going to go ahead and start with my first flat disc, which is going to be the front of my eye. And if you think about it, the front of your eye has, what we're going to be looking at is the sclera. And we're going to create a iris, and I'm going to use that. That's the pigmented color of the eye. It's a muscle, and it controls the opening of the eye, which is known as the pupil. So I'm just creating a little iris here, and I'm making a blue one. And I'm going to make my pupils rather dilated because let's just say I'm nervous right now. So my sympathetic nervous system is going and my pupils will dilate in response to that, which means my iris as a proportion to my pupil will be smaller. Okay. Now, for your pupil, a pupil is really just a hole in the eye. And I can take that toothpick that I have and I can create a hole in the center of the eye. Okay. You can just see I'm kind of carving out a little hole there. So now you sort of see the, oops, see my camera here, the pupil with the, right here. Okay. Some people really like to see the black. So if you're creating the eye, once you've created the hole, do make sure you create the hole. You can put a little black dot in there. And again, like I said, my pupils are dilated. So I'm going to make it a big black dot. Nice big pupil there. Okay. What I'm going to do now, I've got my pupil and my iris. My iris would control my pupil, and it's on the sclera. But I do need to have a transparent layer that's covering the iris. That's that protective layer. That's a transparent layer of the sclera. And I'm going to use a little piece of saran wrap for it. You can roughly cut it out in the shape of something round. It's going to have to cover your iris. And this is called your cornea. And the cornea lets light into the eye, but it also starts the process of focusing. So I'm going to go ahead and cover my iris. It's a little bit more than my iris with my transparent layer of the eye, which is the cornea. Okay. I'm going to flip the eye over. So I'm not going to look at the pupil anymore. I'm going to go to the back of it because behind the pupil is where the lens exists. And I'm going to use, again, I'm going to just ball up a piece of saran wrap and put it right there where the pupil is. So if you notice, I kind of balled up that saran wrap and stuck it in that pupil hole. And then what I'd like to do is to indicate that I understand that in order for my eye to focus on an object, the lens is going to have to accommodate where the image is that I'm focusing, right? Accommodate meaning change shape. And it accommodates through the use of these ciliary muscles. And I've just decided to take some red clay, and I'm creating little strings of red clay here to indicate that there are ciliary muscles that are attached here to the plastic lens. Okay, so you can see I've got 2 here so far, and I'm going to do another 2 on the other side. These are just thin strips, and I just makes you remember that in order for your eye to focus on something far away, it will need to flatten out. And in order for it to focus on something near or close, it will need to curve. As you know, as we get older, we end up with something called presbyopia because our lens starts to harden a little bit and it's harder for it to change shape to accommodate something close up. So here are my ciliary muscles attached to my little plastic piece here, the lens, which is behind the pupil. Okay. I'm going to put that aside because I'm done with the front of my eye. And if you think about it, our eye in the center has a lot of fluid. It's called vitreous humor. We don't really learn about it much in this class, but I'm going to take my second disc now, okay? And I'm ready to look at the back of my eye. So if I'm looking in through my pupil, this is the back of my eye. And the back of my eye is a layer called the retina. And the retina contains those photoreceptors, those rods and cones. And the retina really covers most of the back of the eye. So what you're going to see me doing is creating a flat disc, a green, I'm using green for this. And you don't have to use the same colors, but in the instructions that I've given you, that does denote that this is the layer of the eye called the retina. So I'm going to go ahead and place my retina now in the back of the eye. Now I know it's not neat. I'm not as neat and pretty and perfect as all you are going to be, but there's my retina. Now, if you recall, in the center of the retina is something called the macula. And if you ever heard of somebody who's macular degeneration is when you start to lose your center vision. So people actually start to like almost look like there's a hole in their vision. And the macula is on the center. And we're not going to talk about the macula much more than that. But what I am going to create is on the center of the macula is a very important structure called the fovea. Fovea is on the macula, which is on the center of your retina. And I'm going to create a fovea. And the fovea is actually very, very tiny, very, very tiny. But because I want to be able to show certain structures on my fovea, I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. Okay, and I have my fovea. It's right and smack in the center of the retina in the back of your eye. Now, we are now mostly interested in looking at transduction, that process of taking physical energy, those are the light waves, and turning it into neurochemical energy. So that all happens back here on the fovea, and it happens in two things, the photoreceptors, otherwise known as the rods and the cones. Now, the cones are right here. They're located primarily in the fovea. And so for the purpose of our eye, we're going to take a look at the three types of cones, or that's the trichromatic theory of color vision. It says that we see things, we have cones that are sensitive to red light waves, and I'm going to put a red one on there. Those that are sensitive to blue, so I'm going to go ahead and put another cone on there for blue. And those that are those are also sensitive. Oops, I forgot to leave myself a green, more green clay, so I'm going to steal it from my retina. Those that are sensitive to green. Okay, so make sure you leave yourself a little green for that. So I've got red, green, and blue. If you can, it's hard with this light here to see it. Now, those are the cones, and they're sensitive and they're active in bright light, and they're cones. They're responsible for color and for visual acuity. Lots of C in there, right? Acuity meaning your sharp vision. So when it's dark out, you don't really see texture as well as you will when it's bright out because your cones are activated. Now, on the periphery of the retina, so not in the center, are the rods, and the rods are active in dim light. And I'm going to use black clay because it's black and white vision, it's not color vision. And there's way, way, way more rods than cones. So when you see me put my rods onto my retina, I'm going to have a lot more rods than cones. They don't have to be very big. I'm just going to put like maybe 7, 8, 9, 10 of them on here. Now, if you recall, in order for you to see, the information that gets transduced, that gets sent to neurochemical energy by these rods and cones, gets sent out to bipolar cells, which in turn talk to the ganglion cells, which make up our optic nerve. Now, the axons of those ganglion cells all converge in the eye to form the optic nerve. And the optic nerve, where it leaves the eye, there is a blind spot. There are no rods and cones. So let's take a look at the back of my eye here. And I'm going to use a toothpick for my optic nerve. Now, what you want to do is you want to stick the toothpick through, and you're trying to find a spot on your retina that has no rods and no cones. Do not stick it into the fovea. Your optic nerve is actually a little bit off center from your eyes. I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit off center here. I'm going to stick it all the way through, because of course it wouldn't be sticking out. This is going to my brain. And if you think about it, my two optic nerves, one from each eye, would cross over right here at the crossover at the optic chiasm. And adjacent to that is that suprachiasmatic nuclei. That's that structure on the hypothalamus that manages our circadian cycle. So it detects that incoming light, the incoming light from these optic nerves. Okay, well placed. Okay, so this optic nerve is now ready, and I have both halves of my eye ready to be formed. So the golf ball or the ping pong ball, we're going to use a golf ball. You don't want the clay to stick to it, and it will. Make sure it's covered and it's nice and smooth, okay, with the saran wrap. And then I'm going to take I'm taking the front of my eye, and with the lens facing the golf ball, I'm going to cover this and form it into a shape like an eyeball. You can see it's nice and easy to do. And if you really want to make it look pretty and neat, you can go trim it. But once you're done, remove the saran wrap from the golf ball, and then you can remove the saran wrap from the eye. Okay, and you should have a nicely shaped front of your eye. And we're going to do the same thing with the back of our eye. I'm going to take my optic nerve. I'm just going to place this whole, make sure your saran wrap's on there. Place that part of the eye on here. And again, I'm forming it, nice shape. You can press it down. And I'm going to again remove the saran wrap from the ball, and you can see now I have a nice, it's really hard to see this, but okay, nice back of the eye with my optic nerve. So now I actually have a completed eye, okay? So take a look at that. And there you go. Okay. So this exercise, of course, while it might be fun to do, while you're doing it, as you can see, I was talking myself through it. What does each piece of the eye do? And that's what you should be doing as well. And have fun with it. Enjoy.